There's a special kind of heartbreak that comes from being erased while still alive. Not by strangers. By family. By people whose baby clothes you folded. Whose birthdays you celebrated. Whose tears you wiped. My name is Eleanor Brooks. I'm 68 years old, retired, and 3 years ago my daughter-in-law nearly destroyed my relationship with my own grandchildren. Not through screaming. Not through obvious cruelty. But through something far more dangerous. Manipulation disguised as concern. And the worst part. My son believed every word she said. At least in the beginning. I raised my son Daniel alone after my husband died in a workplace accident when Daniel was only 8 years old. Those years nearly broke me financially. I worked double shifts at a nursing home. Cleaned offices at night. Skipped meals sometimes so Daniel never noticed how little money we had. But I was proud of the life we built together. Daniel grew into a good man. Gentle. Hard-working. Protective. The kind of son who still called his mother every evening just to check in. People used to tell me, "You must have done something right." And for a long time, I believed that too. Then Daniel met Vanessa. At first, I genuinely liked her. She was polished. Educated. Confident in ways I never learned to be. She worked in corporate marketing and always seemed perfectly put together. Beautiful house. Perfect outfits. Perfect social media photographs. The kind of woman who looked like she belonged inside expensive kitchen showrooms. I remember feeling relieved initially. After struggling alone for so many years, I wanted Daniel to have an easier life than I did. And Vanessa certainly looked like ease. Their wedding was beautiful. Their children came quickly afterward. 2 grandchildren. Mason and Lily. Those children became my entire world. Especially after retirement. I babysat constantly while Vanessa and Daniel worked. School pickups. Meals. Doctor appointments. Sleepovers. I was there for everything. And honestly, I loved it. After years of surviving, grandmotherhood felt like finally arriving somewhere soft. But slowly, very slowly, things started changing. At first it was subtle. Vanessa correcting me constantly around the children. The kids don't eat processed sugar anymore. We're limiting television. We don't use that language in our house. Nothing terrible individually. But over time, every interaction began carrying criticism underneath it. And criticism delivered politely still cuts eventually. Then came the parenting comments. Vanessa started questioning nearly everything I did. How I folded laundry. How I packed lunches. How I comforted the children. One afternoon, I overheard her telling a friend, "Eleanor means well, but she's very old-fashioned." Old-fashioned. Funny word. People often use it when they want to dismiss your value without sounding cruel. Still, I stayed quiet. Because I loved my grandchildren more than my pride. That's how many women from my generation were trained. Endure discomfort silently to preserve family harmony. Then social media entered the problem fully. Vanessa practically lived online. Perfect family photos. Matching outfits. Expensive vacations. Carefully curated motherhood. And gradually, I noticed something painful. I disappeared from the family narrative completely. Birthday parties I planned became Vanessa's magical celebrations. School achievements I helped support became their little family moments. Even photos taken inside my own house rarely included me. At first that hurt more than I admitted. Then something worse happened. The children started changing toward me. Especially Mason. Suddenly he became strangely distant. Less affectionate. More guarded. One evening after dinner, he quietly asked, "Grandma, why don't you like Mommy?" I felt physically stunned. Because I had never once spoken negatively about Vanessa to those children. Not once. I asked carefully, "What makes you think that?" Mason looked nervous immediately. Then he whispered, "Mommy says you judge her all the time." That sentence sat in my chest like ice. Because suddenly everything started making sense. Vanessa wasn't simply criticizing me privately. She was rewriting me inside my grandchildren's minds. Slowly. Carefully. And children believe the adults who shape their reality. Especially mothers. After that, things escalated quickly. Sleepovers became less frequent. Visits shortened. Phone calls stopped getting returned. Every boundary Vanessa created somehow positioned me as emotionally unsafe. Not dangerous enough to fully remove. Just problematic enough to control. That distinction matters. Because manipulative people rarely isolate suddenly. They reduce access gradually so outsiders appear unreasonable if they complain. Then came Christmas. The Christmas that shattered everything. I spent nearly 2 weeks preparing. Decorations. Presents. Homemade cookies. The children's favorite meals. I wanted everything perfect. But 3 days before Christmas Eve, Vanessa called. Her voice sounded artificially sympathetic. "We've decided to stay home this year." Stay home. I remember standing in my kitchen staring at dozens of wrapped presents, while something inside me quietly cracked. I asked gently, "Did I do something wrong?" Long silence. Then, "I just think the children need healthier emotional boundaries." Healthier emotional boundaries. Therapy language. Modern psychological phrases weaponized to sound unquestionable. Suddenly I understood something devastating. Vanessa had learned how to make exclusion sound responsible. That Christmas was the loneliest day of my entire life. Worse than widowhood somehow. Because at least death doesn't involve rejection. I sat alone eating food meant for 6 people, while watching snow fall outside the window. And for the first time in years, I genuinely wondered whether my family would slowly disappear without me being able to stop it. Then the accusations started. Apparently I was times emotionally dependent on the children. Times overly attached. Times guilt-oriented. Times resistant to parental authority. Times the language became increasingly clinical. Almost rehearsed. Daniel started repeating it too eventually. Not cruelly. Confusedly. That hurt even more. Because my son looked at me like a problem he needed to manage instead of the woman who sacrificed her entire youth raising him. One afternoon, during a painfully tense conversation, Daniel actually said, "Mom, sometimes you make Vanessa feel judged." Judged. I nearly laughed from disbelief. Because I had spent years swallowing discomfort specifically to avoid conflict. But manipulative people don't require actual attacks. Your existence becomes criticism once they decide you threaten their control. After that conversation, I cried harder than I had since my husband's funeral. Not because of Vanessa. Because my son no longer recognized me clearly. And once someone else controls your image inside a family, everything becomes fragile. Then came the final blow. Lily's 7th birthday party. I wasn't invited. Not forgotten. Not accidentally excluded. Deliberately uninvited. Do you know what it feels like seeing photographs online of your grandchildren blowing out candles while strangers attend a party you weren't allowed to enter? It feels like emotional burial. That night, something inside me finally changed. Because grief eventually transforms into clarity if it survives long enough. And clarity forced me to admit something painful. Vanessa didn't merely dislike me. She wanted emotional ownership over the entire family. No competing influence. No emotional history before her. No grandmother deeply bonded to the children. And honestly, maybe she felt threatened by how much the children loved me. But insecurity becomes cruelty once someone starts punishing children emotionally to protect their own ego. So for the first time in my life, I stepped back completely. No begging. No defending myself endlessly. No chasing access. I stopped calling constantly. Stopped trying to explain myself. Stopped apologizing for things I never did. And strangely, that's when everything began falling apart for Vanessa. At first, the silence nearly destroyed me. No school pickup calls. No random FaceTime from Lily showing me drawings. No sleepy weekend pancakes with Mason. People underestimate how deeply grandparents love. Especially grandparents who helped raise children from infancy. The absence felt physical. Like phantom pain after losing a limb. Still, I stayed quiet. Because for the first time, I understood something important. Chasing people who are determined to misunderstand you only exhausts your dignity. So I stopped chasing. And once I stopped, reality started catching up to Vanessa. The perfect life she curated online wasn't nearly as stable as it appeared. A few months later, Daniel lost his job unexpectedly during company downsizing. Suddenly finances tightened dramatically. Very dramatically. Private school payments became difficult. Childcare costs exploded. Vanessa's carefully managed image began cracking under pressure. And pressure reveals character faster than comfort ever will. At first, I only heard fragments through relatives. Arguments. Stress. Money problems. Then one rainy Tuesday evening, Daniel appeared at my front door alone. He looked exhausted. Older somehow. I hadn't seen him in nearly 4 months. The moment I opened the door, he hugged me so tightly I almost cried instantly. And very softly, he whispered, "I'm sorry." Those 2 words nearly broke me. Because beneath all the manipulation and tension, that was still my son. We sat at the kitchen table for hours talking. Really talking for the first time in years. And slowly, painfully, pieces of truth started surfacing. Apparently once I stepped away completely, Vanessa became increasingly controlling inside the house. Without me functioning as the problem, she needed new emotional targets. Eventually that target became Daniel himself. She criticized his parenting. His finances. His career decisions. His emotional availability. Nothing he did seemed enough anymore. And slowly Daniel began recognizing something horrifying. The issue had never truly been me. I had simply been convenient. That realization crushed him emotionally. Then came the sentence that explained everything. Daniel stared down at his coffee and said, "Vanessa always said she worried the kids loved you more than her." There it was. The truth. Not safety concerns. Not boundaries. Jealousy. Pure jealousy. And honestly, that confession hurt almost as much as the separation itself. Because children should never become emotional territory adults compete over. But insecure people often confuse love with ownership. Daniel admitted something else too. Vanessa constantly monitored the children's affection toward me. If they talked about me too much afterward, she became withdrawn or irritated. So eventually the children started self-correcting emotionally around her. That realization devastated me completely. Because children should never feel responsible for managing adult insecurities. Then one evening about 3 weeks later, my phone rang unexpectedly. It was Lily. Crying. Hard. Grandma. Mommy and Daddy are screaming. My heart dropped instantly. I asked where Daniel was. Apparently he'd left after an argument. Vanessa was upstairs crying. And both children were frightened. Without hesitation, I drove there immediately. The moment Lily opened the door and wrapped her tiny arms around me, I nearly collapsed emotionally. Because despite everything, children remember love. Real love leaves fingerprints no manipulation fully erases. Mason hugged me too eventually. More cautiously. Almost guiltily. And that broke my heart most of all. No child should feel guilty for loving their grandmother. I stayed with them until Daniel returned home later that night. Vanessa barely looked at me. The tension inside that house felt unbearable. And for the first time, I saw her clearly without intimidation. She looked exhausted. Fragile. Not powerful anymore. Just deeply unhappy. Over the next few months, their marriage deteriorated rapidly. Financial stress worsened. Arguments increased. And eventually Daniel discovered something devastating. Vanessa had secretly accumulated enormous credit card debt trying to maintain their perfect lifestyle online. Designer purchases. Luxury trips. Home staging. Image management. Thousands upon thousands of dollars. All hidden. That discovery triggered the final collapse. One night Daniel called me crying harder than I'd heard since childhood. I don't even know who I married. That sentence stayed with me. Because sometimes manipulation succeeds, so gradually people don't realize they're inside it until years later. Eventually Daniel moved out temporarily. And suddenly Vanessa faced something she had spent years avoiding. Reality without control. Within weeks, everything unraveled publicly. School payments lapsed. The mortgage fell behind. Friends disappeared quickly once the polished image cracked. And worst of all, Vanessa realized she could no longer manage the children emotionally alone. Because despite all her efforts to isolate me, the children still trusted me deeply. That became undeniable during the hardest moment of all. Vanessa's mother suffered a stroke unexpectedly. Severe. Hospitalization. Rehabilitation. And suddenly Vanessa found herself emotionally overwhelmed beyond anything she could control. One afternoon, she showed up at my door unexpectedly. No makeup. No polished image. No superiority. Just exhaustion. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Then quietly, almost ashamed, she said, "I don't know how to do all this. I wish I could tell you I felt triumphant. I didn't. Mostly I felt sad. Because broken people often create broken situations, trying desperately to feel secure." We sat together awkwardly in my living room while she cried. Really cried. Not manipulative tears. Exhausted tears. And eventually she admitted something shocking. After becoming a mother, she constantly feared losing emotional importance in her own family. She worried. Times. The children preferred me. Times. Daniel trusted me more. Times. She would always come second emotionally. times. So instead of building stronger relationships, she tried controlling existing ones. That confession explained everything and solved nothing simultaneously. Because understanding pain doesn't erase damage. Still, something softened between us afterward. Not friendship. Not trust. But honesty. And honesty changes people. Over the following year, we rebuilt things slowly. Very slowly. With boundaries. With caution. With painful conversations. Daniel entered therapy. Vanessa eventually did too. And perhaps most importantly, the children were finally allowed to love freely without emotional punishment attached to it. That changed them immediately. Lily became affectionate again. Mason relaxed emotionally in ways that made me realize how tense he'd become before. Children absorb household emotional pressure like sponges. Once peace returned, so did their joy. Do you know what surprised me most through all of this? Karma didn't arrive through revenge. It arrived through exposure. Vanessa eventually became trapped inside the same emotional insecurity she once projected onto me. And once she finally experienced loneliness herself, she understood the cruelty of what she'd done. These days, things remain imperfect but real. And honestly, real matters more than perfect. Vanessa and I will probably never become deeply close. Some wounds leave permanent tenderness. But there is respect now. And boundaries. Healthy boundaries. The kind families should have had from the beginning. Last Christmas, Lily handed me a handmade card that simply said, "I'm happy you came back." I cried in the bathroom for nearly 10 minutes after reading it. Because children rarely care about adult narratives long term. They remember who loved them consistently. That's what survives. Not manipulation. Not image management. Love. This has been Toxic Family Files. And remember, people who try to control love usually destroy the very thing they're trying to keep.